Comfort precedes sin, and sin precedes your downfall. Oftentimes, men don't realize that it's not sin specifically, not at least at the beginning, that leads to them falling, but it's comfort, them floating like a leaf in the wind, forgetting their prayer life, forgetting their routine, and realize that when they are undisciplined, they become a target. Now, I'm not impervious to this. I actually had a direct experience with this recently, and I want to talk about it, my learning lesson, and a warning to all the men that watch this channel that comfort and being undisciplined leads to you falling. And as we know, the relationship between sloth, gluttony, and lust, if one becomes slothful, especially a sorrow toward the spiritual goods, as I've spoken about before, gluttony, lust, start to become a lot more alluring because your spiritual guard is down. And now Holy Writ commands us to be vigilant and to be sober and vigilant and to remain watchful because the enemy is like a roaring lion waiting to devour. That is straight from scripture itself. And it's funny because I think I was getting a little bit proud for a bit there. My prayer life being very rigid, very structured, very disciplined, and it being that way for quite some time now. Well, I took a week off to go on vacation. I didn't take a week off of prayer, but I took a week to go visit family in Vancouver with my family. And traveling with little ones is always chaotic. And it faced me with the reality that remaining in such a routine when you're on the road is quite difficult. Things still remained morning prayer, rosary, but the Angelus and many of the other things that we did as a family and I did solo kind of fell to the wayside because we were kind of always on the go. Eating got a little sloppy, and next thing you knew, I didn't really feel like praying like I did before. Now, I'm not one that's like a stranger to this really necessarily. There's a lot of times I don't feel like training. There's a lot of times that I don't feel like praying, but I do so anyways because in justice, you need to render to God what he is owed. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what we feel. It doesn't matter what consolations we receive from prayer. We still have to accomplish said prayer every day for our own good and, of course, to again render God what he is owed, our love and our devotion and our time. And I had this direct experience with when eating kind of goes by the wayside, your prayer life starts to slip. All of a sudden, you become spiritually lazy and you start seeking what? Dopamine. And what does this all point to? Comfort. Men are lustful because they're comfortable. Men are gluttonous because they're comfortable. Men are slothful because they're comfortable. And when you are in that place for too long, it feels like you have cement boots on, that it's hard to make progress. Getting back into routine now was rather swift now that I'm home. Praise be to God. But it felt arduous, like getting the car moving again and regaining that momentum was difficult. So how many of you that are watching this are entrenched in some kind of sin and it's hard to get moving again? It's hard to get the ball rolling again. And what a lot of guys do, and they make a huge mistake, is that they try to go from 0 to 100 and try to do all the things again instead of beating themselves where they're at and understanding that their capabilities, at least at this stage, are limited. And what I realized in this too was that the prayer life, my prayer life, your prayer life, especially when you're outside of your routine, is especially important because next thing you know, you're kind of waning on your normal disciplines, and next thing you know, you're craving dopamine, whether it be more food, whether it be tobacco products or nicotine, like myself. That's something that I have been known to enjoy. Mindless conversation, not being as guarded with your speech, not being as guarded with your thoughts, not being as guarded with your daily habits. And, sometimes I'd like to say that God uses these experiences for our betterment. He certainly used this for my betterment because, again, I got a little bit proud, maybe not knowingly, maybe subconsciously, of this prayer life, when really all it takes is a single retraction of grace for God to just take his eyes off of me for a single second, for everything to go to crap. And everything didn't go to crap, but I did feel anxiety start to creep up, comfort start to creep up, a little bit of depression start to creep up again. And next thing you knew, I was entertaining these wild thoughts again, not lustful thoughts, but wild thoughts about my life and what I should be doing with my life, and not wanting to re-engage with my habits when I know that was just comfort talking. And comfort is the devil's trap because, like I said at the beginning, comfort precedes sin, sin precedes the downfall. Next thing you know, you're deeply entrenched in all of these habits that entertain your lower appetites. That above all, I'm a gym guy. In fact, when I was over there, I deadlifted 811 pounds, an all-time deadlift PR. So me, I'm no stranger to physical discipline. And of course, I know how to get up and get going when it comes to this, but that is not enough to control those lower appetites. And it's made me realize with even more intensity that above all, the prayer life is the most important thing, that our maintaining of our state of grace is the most important thing. But men have lulled themselves into a false sense of comfort. We're not made for comfort. We're made for greatness and the right worship of God. And it took me deviating from this routine to realize this. And I wake up this morning foggy, not wanting to get out of bed. And it's funny how quickly these things take hold and how many of you are walking around like zombies. And, in a sense, too, it made me relate to a lot of the men that I work with, a lot of the men that watch me, in that sometimes you feel like you're put on a pedestal. Oh man, this guy can do no wrong. I assure you guys, I can do wrong. And in fact, I trip up against myself often, but I do always return to my disciplines. That's the difference, is that I have a rigid foundation of discipline. So even when I veer off a little bit, by the grace of God, I'm able to cling to that grace and return back to normal. Comfort is killing you. It's not necessarily sin, not at the outset, that's killing you, but it's comfort. You've gotten too comfortable in your prayer habits. And it made me realize that when you're not progressing in the spiritual life, you are regressing in the spiritual life. It's completely unlike any other discipline. And that sometimes, progress in the gym will wax and wane and will go, it'll ebb and flow. You'll make progress, you won't make progress. And sometimes by no fault of your own. Maybe you have to get creative with your recovery modalities, etc. But that's part of the process. Spiritual discipline is its own animal in that there's no maintenance phase. There's no waxing and waning. There's no ebb and flow. And that ebb and flow comes from our inability to maintain routine, or our inability to continue to pursue what is arduous interiorly. And I'm not saying this to preach down at men, because as people have come to know, I have a great deal of sympathy for men and a great deal of love for men. This is why I continue to do what I do here. But comfort is killing you. And my challenge in this video is for you to take a sincere and earnest and honest look at your prayer life, at your spiritual life, how frequently you're going to confession, how often you're praying the rosary, how often you're praying at all every day. And understanding that many of your woes come from the fact that you don't do these things, or you don't pursue it with enough intensity. And that the guys that overwhelmingly have the most success when they work with me or when they're doing it solo is when they maintain their state of grace and they fight for their prayer life. They don't care whether or not they feel like it, but they do it anyways. And every so often, they take a sincere look and inventory at their prayer lives, at their interior lives, and see what they're doing, what they could be doing, what they're doing kind of poorly, what they could be doing better, and even deeper. And it makes me realize the more that I grow as a Catholic, the more I realize this is such an interior faith. Because even beyond the prayers, how are you saying the prayers? Are you just paying lip service? Is it just some kind of mechanical repetition? Are you saying these prayers with true devotion and true love? Now, I can't remember who said it, but the only bad rosary is a rosary that's not said. Now, to a certain degree, I understand that, especially with kids. You're not going to be able to do the most devoted, heartfelt rosary every single time. Sometimes we do it when we're driving. Sometimes we do it when they're getting bathed, etc. And they're still learning, especially those of you that are fathers, you can relate to this. But you ought to be doing one on your own that is devoted, where you are sitting there and you're not letting your mind get distracted. Because from my understanding too, the more that I read and learn about this, the more you allow yourself to be distracted, the more you allow yourself to essentially fall into some kind of venial sin. Now, I think St. Thomas talked about where if you are distracted by a thought and you take delight in the thought and you entertain it anyways, that is when it becomes venially sinful. The same can be applied to being distracted in Mass. However, if you find yourself, you're distracted, well, that's not the distraction itself that's a sin. It's whether or not you bring yourself back to prayer. And in fact, I think St. Thomas also mentions that this is actually meritorious, where you're distracted, you bring yourself back to devotion, and there's some merit there. Take an honest look at your prayer life, guys. Many of your woes, many of the things that you're struggling with come from the fact that you are too comfortable prayerfully. And secondarily, you're probably too comfortable physically as well. You're not subjecting yourself to enough difficulty. And that's one thing that this week showed me. It's difficult for somebody like me to take vacation because it's a week off, it's a week to decompress, and that's good. We do need rest. There's a season for rest, there's a season for harvest, there's a season to plant seeds, etc. And but sometimes I take rest too far, and that means every area of my life becomes way too comfortable. I start to eat a little extra, start to indulge a little bit extra coffee, hanging around, sitting around, not walking around as much as I should, not doing as much activity. Next thing you know, prayer life kind of goes to crap compared to my usual. Physical life kind of is hanging on by a thread. Many of you are not just too comfortable spiritually, but you're too comfortable physically as well. And it made me realize that if we as men aren't coming up against something arduous on a daily basis, then we have this tendency to drift like leaves in the wind. What do? Next thing you know, you're drifting right into the hands of the enemy, because discipline turns into seeking of dopamine, and this mortification turns into seeking of motivation, and all these quotes that I shared in my last video, but they ring absolutely true. And this is not balance. This turns into something that is akin to bondage, because you're enslaved to your appetites. You're enslaved to dopamine. You're enslaved to easiness. And this is why your spirit is crying out to you. And this is why you may be feeling this low grade depression, where everything kind of feels a little gray. You're not doing enough things that are hard. Okay. Whether that means training with the barbell, whether that means more fasting, whether that means more praying. And it was this week off that made me realize that I need to double, triple, quadruple down on my prayer life. And then it was hard getting back to it. But what other choice do I have? In a lot of these types of scenarios, whether it be in business or with the spiritual life or physically, I always ask myself, what is the alternative? Is the alternative to just sit around and not do anything? Is the alternative to just, simply just entertain and pontificate, somehow getting better? Or is it to make that actual choice, this absolute movement of the will that I've spoken about so often, where men have forgotten that they actually have a will and a choice, and that no choice is necessarily, and especially when it comes to this type of stuff well within their control, is not beyond their control. What is the alternative, men? What happens if you remain the same? What happens if you just continue to pursue comfort? Your spirit rots, and then your flesh follows. And when your spirit rots, it becomes comfortable, and you keep forgetting to, or not forgetting, but by willful ignorance, willful neglect, now your spiritual sword is dull. What happens to your flesh? Many of the problems of modern men are not from not pursuing enough physical difficulty, at least not for a lot of guys, because there's a lot of guys out there in the red pill space, etc., guys that are kind of like Andrew Tate. They do a lot of stuff physically, but spiritually they're rotten. They've got this kind of mismatch with regards to their natural discipline, which is good and admirable, but have no merit, because it's not married to any kind of supernatural grace. It's simply to just continue to indulge in the flesh. But a lot of guys have a twofold problem, where they have a flesh problem, where they're lazy, they don't move themselves enough, they don't come up against physical resistance. This is why I recommend the gym, especially in a modern culture like this, where we're all in cubicles, we're all streaming, we're all on webcam, we're all kind of doing this stuff while we're seated. And even just sitting here doing this is uncomfortable, because I feel like I should be doing something physical. But this inability, or this not wanting to come up against difficult things physically daily, and especially spiritual things daily, those little attachments that you want to rid yourself of. Yeah, tomorrow. I'll just do it tomorrow. I'll just do it tomorrow, until tomorrow doesn't come. Where a lot of men are just striving for purgatory instead of a state of sanctified perfection. And I'm so far away from that too, guys. This is not me preaching. My whole intention with starting on social media was to kind of document the process, right? Not to be some kind of guru, not to be some kind of leader. That was not the intention. The intention was, I've overcome some things, it's left some clues, and I want to leave and hopefully package it in such a way that's tangible, so men can go in action and action those items. Whether or not they pursue coaching from me is irrelevant. There's a greater battle here, because if we want to reclaim the culture, we've got to rebuild the man. So if this is you and you fall into a state of comfort, honestly and earnestly audit yourself. Your spiritual life, number one, how much you're frequenting the sacraments, especially confession. And then secondarily, how often you're coming up against physical hardship. Because if you're doing none of the above, an easy life will take you astray, will lead you astray. And just like a leaf in the wind, you'll drift right into the clutches of the enemy. And that's exactly where he wants you, frozen in place, slothful with a sorrow toward the spiritual goods, and soft-bellied. And there's a soft-bellied problem in this faith world. There is a lack of wanting to go and meet the devil on the perimeter instead of waiting until he's within the wire, where you're not prepared to fight him when he's within the wire because he's already got you, because you've been lazy, because you've been comfortable. And this week off, this vacation has taught me how quickly that happens, how quickly comfort entangles and ensnares our souls. The next thing you know, we're back to sinning or overindulging. Now, nothing grave happened by the grace of God, but it was still a very sobering experience for me and a warning to all men that have stayed comfortable for far too long. Get uncomfortable, because the pain and the hardship that you choose will be sanctifying. It can be redemptive, but life will find a way to make it painful for you. And that pain, when you're frozen in place and you're comfortable, is far more painful. So if you're a guy that's ready to take this next step and you don't know how to do it, you're frozen in place. Maybe you can't do it on your own. You feel like you can't do it on your own. I'm taking on coaching clients in my Catholic fitness and mentorship program. I'll leave the application link in the description box below. These are for men ready to take that next step, that next leap with actual accountability, holding their feet to the fire. Because sometimes on our own, we can't do it. Lord knows I have to rely on my brothers. I have to rely on, my family. And I shouldn't have to always rely on my family. And I don't always rely on my family. But the point is, we need outside sources of accountability sometimes. And I want to be that for you if you feel so inclined. But otherwise, watch this video, watch it again, share it with a man that you feel needs to listen to this message, because this is something that it plagues us all if we're not careful. Glory to Jesus Christ. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.